Dark Origins, the Chemtrail Conspiracy. To have seen the first contrail, you would have had to have been working with Hans von Ohain of Germany in the early 1930s. Ohain was the inventor and designer of the first operational jet engine, and by the 1950s, a multitude of jet aircraft were already circling the globe. Many of these craft will likely leave a billowing, white cloud-like trail behind them when a hot jet engine is operating in the cold air of Earth's atmosphere. The result will be a contrail. As we will see in this video, varying conditions and weather can contribute to attributes and overall appearance of the trails. Weather modification programs and geoengineering are also likely to blame for leaving evidence of their operations high in the sky. In some cases, these commonly seen contrails have been labeled chemtrails, and the origins of this conspiracy is where it begins to get dark. What exactly is a chemtrail? We can all agree on what a contrail is. So what is a chemtrail? No one seems to know. But it does seem to me it could only be for one of two reasons. Either there is a gigantic cover-up taking place for 25 years, or chemtrails, as they have been described by the theorists, and in this case, the domestic terrorists, are just making the whole phenomenon up. The actual term chemtrail was not even added to our lexicon until 1999. The true origins of the core conspiracy theory dates back to 1996, though, when two shady characters with malicious intent got their hands on a U.S. Air Force Commission proposal titled Weather as a Force Multiplier, Owning the Weather in 2025. After this unclassified document was co-opted and incorporated into the larger web of lies these two were weaving, other budding conspiracy theorists then proceeded to speculate wildly and build a following of chemtrail believers. Even though there has never been a shred of peer-reviewed evidence to support any of this to date. Theories aside, this Air Force study is very interesting. It goes into great detail about how different emerging technologies can be used in combination by the year 2025 to produce a system of controlling the weather. It describes just how this weapon could be used to degrade enemy forces and enhance friendly ones with tactics such as precipitation enhancement, precipitation avoidance, storm enhancement, storm modification, precipitation denial, space weather, fog and cloud generation, fog and cloud removal. Then they go on to paint a picture of the vision in the form of a real-world scenario. It reads, imagine that in 2025, the U.S. is fighting a rich but now consolidated, politically powerful drug cartel in South America. The cartel has purchased hundreds of Russian and Chinese fighters that have successfully thwarted our attempts to attack their production facilities. With their local numerical superiority and interior lines, the cartel is launching more than 10 aircraft for every one of ours. In addition, the cartel is using a French spot system, positioning and tracking imagery systems, which in 2025 are capable of transmitting near real-time multispectral imagery with 1 meter resolution. The U.S. wishes to engage the enemy on the uneven playing field in order to exploit the full potential of our aircraft and munitions. Meteorological analysis reveals that equatorial South America typically has afternoon thunderstorms on a daily basis throughout the year. Our intelligence has confirmed that cartel pilots are reluctant to fly in or near thunderstorms. Therefore, our Weather Force support element, which is part of the Commander-in-Chief's Area of Operations Center, is tasked to forecast storm paths and trigger or intensify thunderstorm cells over critical target areas that the enemy must defend with their aircraft. Since our aircraft in 2025 will have all-weather capability, the thunderstorm threat is minimal to our forces, and we can effectively and decisively control the sky over the target. The WFSE has the necessary sensor and communications capabilities to observe, detect, and act on weather modification requirements to support U.S. military objectives. These capabilities are part of an advanced battle area system that supports the war-fighting Commander-in-Chief. In our scenario, the Commander-in-Chief tasks the WFSE to conduct storm intensification and concealment operations. The WFSE models the atmospheric conditions to forecast within 90% confidence the likelihood of successful modification using airborne cloud generation and seeding. In 2025, uninhabited aerospace vehicles are routinely used for weather modification operations. By cross-referencing desired attack times with wind and thunderstorm forecasts and the spot satellite projecting system, the WFSE generates mission profiles for each UAV. Prior to the attack, which is coordinated with forecasted weather conditions, the UAVs begin cloud generation and seeding operation. UAVs disperse a cirrus shield to deny enemy visual and infrared surveillance. Simultaneously, microwave heaters create localized areas to disrupt active sensing via synthetic aperture radar. This scenario may seem far-fetched, but by 2025, it is within the realm of possibility. The two men who appropriated this document for their schemes and used it as the cornerstone in the fabrication of an elaborate hoax, that is, chemtrails, clearly the work of an agent provocateur. An agent provocateur is a person who commits or who acts to entice another person to commit an illegal or rash act or falsely implicate them in partaking in an illegal act so as to ruin the reputation or entice legal action against the target or group they belong to or are perceived to belong to. The chemtrail theory was just the cherry on top of a body of work built on misinformation, disinformation, Nazi sympathizers, and the eventual purchase of bubonic plague and anthrax cultures. Chemtrail creator Prime. Larry Wayne Harris made a big splash in the news in 1995 due to his arrest. Harris was accused of illegally purchasing bubonic plague samples from a scientific supply company. He had stolen letterhead from the septic tank inspection business he was working for in an effort to place this clandestine order. His request fortunately raised suspicions with a company rep, and Harris was reported to federal authorities. As a result, Congress had to create new laws to prevent this from happening again. In 1998, he was arrested yet again for stockpiling anthrax with the intent of releasing it in the New York City subway system in an effort to implicate Muslim extremists. He also self-published 2 online books about biowarfare, which the Southern Poverty Law Center described as the Aspiring Bioterrorist's How-To Guide. Prior to all of this, in the 1980s, Harris was questioned by Secret Service agents about his involvement with the racist organization Aryan Nations in advance of then-President George H.W. Bush's visit to Ohio. Chemtrailer number 2, Richard Fink. Richard L. Fink was editor of Harris's first book and a fellow member of white supremacist group, the Aryan Brotherhood. In 1995, the men formed a consulting firm which dealt with defense biowarfare and disaster recovery. This company, LWH Consulting, was responsible for inundating the internet with spam about an imminent biological attack from Iraq. These warnings were also a great way to promote his pal Harris's books too, as it turns out. This self-described righteous dude was the station manager of an extreme right-wing Christian radio station. Among the questionable program content, the station's website was littered with links to racist and misleading information. Then, in 1997, Fink posted a dire warning on the now defunct Internet News Group site. He listed 5 characteristics of chemtrails. They follow.
Number 1. The condensation lingers for hours. Number 2. A sinister group is deliberately killing ordinary citizens. The trails are being used as means of population control. Number 3. It is part of chemical and biological warfare. Chemical agents are being added to jet fuel. Number 4. Aircraft produce patterns across the sky. Number 5. Weather control, geoengineering, reduction of ozone damage.
These 5 hallmarks of the classic chemtrail remain the go-to for any average conspiracy buff to this very day. That brings us to chemtrailer number 3. Author William Thomas glommed onto the topic and made it his main bailiwick in an effort to cash in. Surprisingly, he had no connection to the first 2 players, except for their shared love of propagating a dangerous hoax. He started his so-called pursuit for the truth in 1997. By 1999, he had published the article Chemtrails, Poison in Our Skies, which was the first known usage of the word chemtrail. During that same year, Thomas would make numerous appearances on Coast to Coast AM with Art Bell and properly introduce the newly coined word to the masses. And wouldn't you know it, within a week's time, Art had indeed experienced the dangerous effects of chemtrails firsthand. Art relayed on the radio that he was outside and noticed the lingering contrails. He and his wife Ramona checked on the developing trails throughout the day. During the event, they also noticed a strange residue on exposed surfaces. And within a few days, they were both dreadfully ill, sicker than they'd ever been before in their lives, according to Art. Thankfully, he quickly recovered in time to take the call from the fish pond guys. In their conversation, the men conveyed their story.
Art, a few days ago, a thunderstorm suddenly appeared over our small fish pond. But let me tell you, Art, just before the storm broke, the sun was out, and I noticed a grid of condensation trails high above. We were caught by surprise, and quickly realized the substance falling from the sky was not liquid rain, but rather a white, spider-webby-looking stuff.
This stuff eventually dissolved in the fish pond, producing a thick, milky foam, which led to the deaths of hundreds of fish only a few days later, the owner reported. Coincidentally, this pond was located in the high desert of Pahrump, Nevada. So these fish pond guys were in a great position to easily inform their famous neighbor. That neighbor just so happened to be the host of a massive overnight radio show and claimed to have experienced a similar event. A few studies have surfaced over the years claiming to have findings linking chemtrails and traces of compounds found in the soil and water. Barium and ethylene dibromide are the 2 main substances which are said to have been found. But like all hoaxes, there was never any real evidence there in the first place, so naturally nothing ever seems to materialize. Even the late great Jim Marrs cites a case where soil samples carrying these elements were indeed evidence of a link with chemtrails, in his opinion, of course. I personally began to notice the grid patterns regularly after being exposed to the idea in 1999, When contrails were identified as something other than ordinary air traffic residue on coast to coast, I definitely started to try and spot them. I'll admit it, Art had me a little worried about the subject back then, but that was his job. To this day, occasionally I'll look up, and there they'll be. Hey, the sky's a giant chessboard again. That has never completely been explained, at least as far as I'm concerned. When you hear meteorologists and other scientists discuss the reasons chemtrails don't exist, they never really address the lingering grid description that is reported nationwide. But more likely, one of these following reasons are the true cause of the trails and what the purpose truly is. Just because we aren't necessarily being hosed down with biotoxins deliberately aimed at killing off large swaths of the population, that doesn't mean the powers that be have our best interest in mind. The realities are that geoengineering is a real thing and openly going on. The fact that the actual environmental impact of commercial jet contrails are doing more damage than previously thought. And, of course, the implementation of cloud seeding, a type of weather modification that has been around since the 1940s. But what is geoengineering? Geoengineering is the deliberate large-scale manipulation of an environmental process that affects the Earth's climate in an attempt to counteract the effects of global warming. Geoengineering is very real indeed, and those involved have made it clear they are in no way associated with chemtrails. In fact, most companies and universities that are connected to geoengineering have public disclaimers denouncing the association with chemtrails due to the harassment from people connected to chemtrail activism. A bill introduced in Congress in 2005 may have paved much of the way for geoengineering. It was titled Weather Modification Research and Technology Act, and within it, it was written, "It is the purpose of this act to develop and implement a comprehensive and coordinated national weather modification policy and a national cooperative federal and state program of weather modification research and development." This field of study could account for some of the chemtrail confusion. With so many commercial jets blanketing the Earth in contrails, it's no wonder normal contrails are mistaken for the elusive chemtrail. In 2018, the Transportation and Environment Organization found data supporting the idea that contrails contribute to global warming, double the amount previously reported by the industry. Keep in mind, the researchers made clear they are not studying chemtrails. Rather, they're studying ice crystals that are formed from the extreme vapor created by the jet engine operating at high altitudes. Their key findings include contrails block sunlight, but they also trap heat, even in the dark. 2.2% of flights create 80% of contrails related to the warming. Takeoffs in late afternoon and early evening that leave contrails late into the night, changing the trajectory of those flights up or down by 2,000 feet or less, could reduce the warming effects by 59%. So we are seeing contrails forming patterns in our skies. It's just not for the reasons chemtrail enthusiasts might think. And finally, the most important factor in producing contrails that linger, the weather, of course. Earth's upper atmosphere air temperature is much different than the temperatures here on the ground, usually around negative 40 degrees with strong winds that are racing by at 50 to 100 miles per hour, and the air is much less dense up there. The conditions at 35,000 feet are a sharp contrast to the weather in your backyard. In order for a contrail to form and persist in the first place, there needs to be a supply of very cold air with high humidity. These two factors are present much of the time in the upper atmosphere. This could explain the majority of the reports of persistent contrails. What we are seeing up there aren't chemtrails, especially not in the way the theorists have portrayed them. We have been informed by industry, science, and military sources of the myriad of the possible actions being taken in the skies that could produce contrails. The sheer amount of activity in the atmosphere, the upper atmosphere, and in orbit at any given moment is staggering to me. When combined with consistently ideal weather conditions and all that air traffic, that obviously can account for most of the sightings, at least in my mind. There are real operations taking place and leaving evidence, many of which involve proprietary or classified information, which I'd never have access to anyway. That nasty original crew that got this alternative reality game started had very sinister motives. All of these guys have passed on now, but much like a contrail, although they have moved on, unfortunately, the effect of their schemes still linger.